We're going to take a look at BYU Studies here. Go to your browser, type in BYU Studies, hit return. It pulls up this reference or the link to BYU Studies. You'll notice here that I've already logged into my account, which is right here. If you haven't subscribed to BYU Studies, I recommend that you do. There's a tremendous amount of great stuff here. You just have to recognize that there's a lot of Mesomania. I'm going to show you an example here with horses. So just type in horses in the search box. Click on search. The first article that comes up is an article of the week called Hard Evidence of Ancient American Horses. So we're going to click on that. I'm going to open it in a new tab so we have the original tab available. Here's a summary of the article. It's an introduction to it. The full article you can get to by clicking at the bottom under featured items. So we click on that. Again, I opened it in a new tab. Now here we have, here's how this works. If you subscribe to BYU Studies, you can download everything for free. If you don't have a subscription, I think it's $7 or something to download, so it's worth the subscription. As you go through this executive summary or abstract, you'll notice that there's 8 items of evidence that he's going to be discussing here. A lot of it has to do with the focus on Central America, which is unfortunate. We talk here about images in Mesoamerican art, for example. We're going to talk about tapirs. We're going to talk about wheeled artifacts. All of this is an effort to support the Mesoamerican theory, as I'll show you in just a minute here. So in order to save time, I previously downloaded the article in a PDF. This is what it looks like, and I've annotated this a little bit just so we can focus on the key points. First, although incomplete, the geological and archaeological record does provide support for horses and even wheeled vehicles in ancient America. I know you're wondering about the wheeled vehicles. We'll get to that in just a minute. Physical remains conclusively dated to around 500 BC and earlier from supposed Mesoamerica or Book of Mormon lands in Mesoamerica are yet to be found. Look at that. He's assuming the Book of Mormon took place in Mesoamerica, and he's pointing out that they have not found physical remains dating to that time period in that area. Might make you wonder why they're looking in Mesoamerica, and I'll show you at the end of this why they are. But here's Daniel Johnson. Brother Johnson's done an awesome job in this article. I'm not criticizing the article. I'm just pointing out the Mesomania that has influenced his conclusions here. This is a discussion of chariots. Book of Mormon readers can logically infer that the use of chariots was for transportation or in horses. Was for transportation or as beasts of burden, but these uses are not specifically described. So they're making inferences here about what the horses were used for. Probably reasonable inferences, but you'll see they're influenced largely by the Mesomania approach. Jaredites had horses, Nephites had horses. The last mention of horses is about AD 26. Now notice again, here it comes, well before most known surviving writing or artifacts in Mesoamerica. So again, the emphasis on Mesoamerica. Let's see, much of the knowledge of these ancient cultures comes from archaeological finds from much later dates, such as the classic and post-classic periods of the Maya region. Culturally and chronologically, now this is one that's quite interesting, perhaps even geographically. Nephites are not the Maya, Aztecs, or Inca. Now this opens the door possibly to consideration of an alternative geography, but it never shows up anywhere else in this article. It says here, archaeologists note that indigenous New World cultures had no draft animals or beasts of burdens. Even if this is true, at least the Maya did understand the concept. Now, we just saw how nowhere in the Book of Mormon does it say they used horses as draft animals or beasts of burden, but now he's saying that the Maya did. Might make us want to rethink the Maya connection. There's an obvious depiction of a rider mounted on some indeterminate animal down here in Central America. Of course, the Book of Mormon never talks about doing that. So again, you wonder why we're talking about this if the Book of Mormon never referred to it. Here's a depiction of the artwork, the Mayan vase, and these other artifacts. A wheeled effigy. Again, this is late classic. Now, this one I find quite interesting. The mention of chariots brings another supposed anachronism to critics' minds: wheels. Although wheels are never specifically described in the Book of Mormon, they are easily imagined on chariots. Why do we care if they're easily imagined? I mean, are we going to stick with the text, or are we going to be imagining things here? He points out here, which is legitimate, that the opponent's demands for wheels do not have to be met, which is totally true. I totally agree with that. But here he continues, supposing for the sake of argument the Lamanites and Nephites were knowledgeable about wheels. He goes on and on talking about wheels. Why does he do that? He showed us right here. Because in Central America they find evidence that the people did have wheels. Therefore they conflate that with the Book of Mormon account, and they try to go on and on talking here about wheels in Central America, and they're inferring that somehow the Nephites had wheels, even though they never talked about it in the text. All right, now one of the key points that he brings up here is that the Spanish introduced horses to America, and the real question right here is when or even if horses became extinct on these continents, because we know horses existed anciently. Let's see what he says here about the tapir situation. He acknowledges that the argument is weak. It's a weaker argument as in Nephi using Hebrew words such as horse to describe large animals unknown to him. This is the John Sorensen tapir idea that Joseph Smith translated as horse, the word that in the plates meant a tapir. Of course, Joseph Smith had tapirs in his own dictionaries available in 1828 and 1830. So it's not like he wouldn't have known what a tapir was. But they still like to say that a likely candidate for Nephi's horse has to be Baird's tapir. Again, here we have a bit of imagination. With a bit of imagination, readers can see why Nephi would have called this animal a horse if he had no Hebrew vocabulary for it. But why would Joseph Smith translate it as horse if it meant a tapir? Then it says here, what if, here's a question that I love, what if Nephi and his successors really did write about horses as Book of Mormon readers of today would know them? In other words, what if the translation was correct? This seems surprising to some of the Mesoamerican advocates. Hopefully most people who read the Book of Mormon don't find that surprising. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this in detail except to point out that he's talking about Native Americans in North America here. It says, many native groups seem to be very familiar with horses and horsemanship, and were even masters at equestrian skills at a surprisingly early time. As far back as the initial contact occurred, white explorers were encountering horse cultures among native people. The horse's true origin seemed to be shrouded in mystery. Now, all of this is referring to North America, not Central America, not Mayans, not that region of the New World. Okay, for example, we have west of the Hudson Bay, Louisiana, southern Idaho, eastern Oregon, northern Mexico, South Dakota, the Pawnee, and the Apache right here. See this? He's talking about the Pawnee and the Apache. Had horses early on. We have, continuing down on this article, it says Native American beliefs, although disregarded by most non-native scholars, provide another perspective on these origins. For example, the Comanche thought the Great Spirit had created horses especially for them. The Blackfoot's claim of having horses extends as far back as their traditions. So these Native Americans in North America knew horses. They accounted for them as far back as their collective memory went. Now, this is one of my favorite diagrams in this whole article. It's one of the best we see anywhere. in Mesoamerican literature. This is right in BYU Studies. But notice where these discoveries by the Europeans of horses among the Native American tribes was. Now, if you know our geography, our proposed geography, we think Lehi landed around here. Numerous findings of horses among native tribes, at least in this area. Of course, this was 1719, not 600 BC, but still they're in the general area. And we think that the Nephi went up here to the mountains of Tennessee and then descended along the Tennessee River and up into this area, which is the Zarahemla area, right where there's horses. And eventually, of course, they were forced by the Lamanites up here into New York, where Cumorah is. So if this is the geography of the Book of Mormon, we can see some correlation, some actual evidence of horses among the Native American tribes, just the way the Book of Mormon describes. But instead, we have this article and other Mesoamerican advocates insisting that horses were somewhere down here where there's no evidence of them, somewhere in Central America. Go figure, huh? All right, continuing on with the article. Researchers originally believed that these early progenitors of the horses were strays from conquering expeditions. However, no clear, obvious evidence supports this theory. And this is the coolest part of this whole article, because the generally prevailing theory of horses among the Indians being the descendants of strays from the Spanish, there's really no historical evidence to support that. As I understand it, there's no biological evidence in terms of DNA to support that either. Researchers used to believe that horses discarded by Hernando de Soto's men in 1541 were the ancestors of all American horses west of the lower Mississippi. That assertion now rests firmly in the realm of fiction, and he explains that De Soto and the other Spanish kept careful track of their horses. And here's another one. Only 4 or 5 horses, all stallions, remained at this time when De Soto died. These few horses were killed by native tribes before the Spanish boats were even out of sight. They brought mostly stallions over here. This points out that Francisco Coronado brought only 2 mares with him. How are you going to produce enough horses to fill North America with just 2 mares? He points out here, this is an interesting point too, he says that the Aztecs and the people in Central America feared the horses. They had never known them before. They were unknown in Mexico. And the Spanish didn't want them to realize that they were mortal creatures, so they buried them whenever they died, so the natives wouldn't know that they were mortal. By contrast, as we mentioned already, the tribes in North America were familiar with horses. In fact, their traditions said they had horses from the very beginning. He concludes here that apparently horses had been absent in Mesoamerica for a long time, possibly even a millennium or more by the time of the European arrival. Actually, there's no evidence that they had the horses that weren't in their traditions even. Indigenous people in New Spain of the 16th century had no knowledge of these animals, unlike the Native Americans in North America. He points out here that the Spanish conquest of North America reached Texas, but it didn't go any further, and a major factor for this limit of their expansion was the Plains Indians, who already had horses. Of course, the people in North America, where we think the Book of Mormon took place, did have horses. There's this problem with the pintos, and points out that for American horses to have this piebald coat, the coat of many colors or different colors, horses of similar coloration as progenitors would have had to be extant. In other words, the colored horses had to come from somewhere, and the Spanish didn't want colored horses, so they couldn't have come from the Spanish. That's what he's saying here. A great point, excellent point. Let's see. Indigenous people eventually did steal horses from European settlements, but when their first reaction of fear, awe, or hatred is considered, the outcome would not be expected for quite some time. Again, it was the people in Central America who feared the horses. The people in North America had already embraced them. In fact, they were using them to fight the Spanish. Now this is an awesome one, because here's a piece of artwork from Chichen Itza, which postdates Book of Mormon time periods, that is has been used, like here it says, this panel shows an image that has been interpreted by some Latter-day Saint scholars to be a man standing next to a horse. Of course, it could have been another beast as well. It could have even been a tapir, for that matter. And Chichen Itza dates to past Book of Mormon time periods. This dating would mean that the knowledge of horses survived for a long time, if not the actual animals themselves. Well, you can understand the fallacy in that argument. I don't need to go through it. Here's an example of primitive horse and leg foot bones found among fossils at Bone Lick, Kentucky, a Thomas Jefferson expedition. Even early on, in the early 1800s, paleontologists proved that ancient horses lived in North America. This has been known for a long time. Researchers now believe that horses, camels, early elephant types, and other large animals evolved first in this hemisphere before migrating to Asia, and then becoming extinct here for a combination of reasons that's still debated. One of those reasons could be they were hunted to extinction. Environmental change could be another possibility. As they point out here, fossils record, just because the most recent remain is from 12,500 years ago, that doesn't mean that the horses became extinct at this time. In North America alone, up to 9 varieties of ancient horses are known. I mean, they had horses, just like Nephi said. On the topic of ancient American horse remains, Mesoamerica also plays an important role. Well, by comparison to North America, it plays an insignificant role at best. They find a couple horse teeth here in a few locations, which presumably were used for trading. They wouldn't be trading horse teeth if horses were common or even well known. The teeth were found along with pottery fragments, and judging by their stratigraphic location and degree of mineralization, analysts designate them to be pre-Columbian as well. Okay, pre-Columbian, but they are found with trade items. So most likely these were considered valuable because of their rarity, not because they were common. Which means they likely were traded from North America down to Central America. Supporters of the Book of Mormon need to be cautious about the evidences they accept and support, especially in controversial areas. That's always good advice, but it seems to me that these Mesoamerican proponents need to be cautious when the evidence supports the North American setting and contradicts the Central American setting. It's a good example. This whole article is like this. Here's some examples of dating of other fossils, horse fossils. They have surprising results from some North American samples. Here's one in Texas, Colorado, Wyoming. Here he points out that the North American curly is a species of horse that was not discovered for a long time, and therefore they try to say here that there could have been other similar cases down in Central America. But they use an example from North America as evidence, and then they try to suggest that maybe there is something like that in Central America. It's crazy. People who criticize the Book of Mormon for not, because on the grounds of horses, he points out here it's lamentable that people lose their faith in the Book of Mormon because the fallacy of saying there are no horses is based on a foundation of ignorance. Really, in my opinion, what he's saying right here misses the point. The situation is lamentable because the LDS scholars are obsessed with Mesoamerica and don't accept the evidence that's right there in North America, as this article shows on that map. Okay. Here's another one. A possible and certainly reasonable answer is based on the theory that horses, as people today would recognize them, did indeed inhabit the ancient lands known to peoples in the Book of Mormon during the relevant time periods, and he has examples of that from North America. Likely science today would classify them as Western horse and Mexican horse, whose remains have been found in the Americas. They say here that, this is kind of funny, he supposes that there were horses in Mesoamerica, but the surviving populations, the hypothetical surviving populations, were pushed to the north and south, and their existence was forgotten by subsequent cultures inhabiting the original areas, such as the Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs, and many others who did not understand this new animal reintroduced by Spanish conquest. I hope you see the irony of this. What he's saying here is that the people in Central America had no tradition of horses. They were terrified when the Spanish brought them over, whereas the Native American cultures in North America already had horses and even used the horses to fight the Spanish. So if we're going to say that the Book of Mormon accurately describes horses among both the Jaredites and the Nephites, the only conclusion we can reach is that the Book of Mormon narrative took place in North America. Now, people ask, well, why are they so focused on Mesoamerica? Brother Johnson here in his bio explains. He's the principal author of an LDS Guide to Mesoamerica and an LDS Guide to the Yucatan. Since the 1999, Daniel has led friends on excursions to Central America and has given firesides about his research and travels to ancient Maya sites. He has spoken on archaeological topics at the Book of Mormon Archaeological Forum's annual conferences. Now, we've talked about Book of Mormon Archaeological Forum. It's a club for people who are trying to promote the Book of Mormon as a Mesoamerican document. So, all this goes to show that there's some great research in BYU Studies. This is a fantastic article, but it's almost ruined by this focus on Central America. If you read this with a careful eye and you're cognizant of the problem of Mesomania, you can get a lot out of it. But again, it's another example of how much these scholars are stretching to try to fit the round hole of Mesoamerica, or the round peg of Mesoamerica, into the square hole of the Book of Mormon text. Talk to you later.